Finally, welcome back, fellow listener. Welcome back to the River audiobook channel. Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. Blah, 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 blah. So, what we can it's a bit of time as usual. I had 2 busy weeks, but now today and tomorrow I read and go live for you. So, well, well. So, where we uh, end the last time, we are reading Artifact of Evil, the second book of the Gord the Rogue series and the second book of the Grey Oak Adventure series, as you can see in the cover. This is the second book written for Dungeons and Dragons for the Grey Oak setting, the first ever created setting for Dungeons and Dragons. The second book written by none other than Gary Gygax. In the last 3 chapters, we read a lot of time ago, we see our heroes, Shert, the Bard, Gord, the heroes follow the army of evil led by Obmi and his fellow half companion Keak. They have some issues with word something. I didn't remember the kind of creatures, but they have some issues. And then our heroes reach them and have the first skirmish with the humanoid army, but they had to retreat because the enemy was far more numerous. Okay, then let's start. Let let's continue with chapter 25 of Artifact of Evil. We are almost at the end of this book. Anyway, chapter 25. Wait a second, I forgot my water. Sorry. That's important. Okay. Okay. Good. Let's begin. Okay. Meow, said Shirt. Gord shot the hillman a dark skull that threatened the mayhem. It isn't funny, Shirt. Stop it. The bard said, just managing to suppress a smile. Gord looked at both men disdainfully. What I managed was more than either or both of you could have done. Besides, if you think it is a joke to creep through an encampment of towering humanoids as a little pussycat in order to overhear what's being said, you tried. So, as we discover now, the were-jackal or anything the were-cat, Obmi and Keak searching is Gord. Well, surprise, I didn't expect it. Sure, really, I didn't expect it too. And sorry a second, I have some issues. It's pretty dark outside today. But anyway, we can't, the barbarian said with a broad grin of contentment. As you yourself pointed out, only you can manage the trick. Tetch and his small companion Shed were sitting cross-legged nearby. I forgot of these two. They are um, wannabe hunters. They are normal humans. Wannabe hunters. They risk their life for nothing. Okay, good. uh, they had listened solemnly to the tale of guards using the ring to take cat form. They were frightened by were creatures of any sort, the very thought making them shudder. Yet this man who told them about turning into a huge black leopard and killing losels thereby was a friend, and losels were awful things too. They could only listen and withhold judgment. It seemed there was a whole lot more to the world than Tersham village, and being successful hunters. Both lads listened carefully, not only because the story was exciting and full of danger, but because they wanted some clue about the treasure. So far they had seen more of trouble with evil humanoids and the like than folk were ever expected to. The reward must be really terrific for this man to go through all this sort of danger just to get the key. What would the dragon be like? Thatch looked at Shad, and Shad stared back for a moment. There was an unspoken exchange then, both boys wishing that they hadn't decided to set out into the forest as hunters quite so soon. That fool little dwarf is a wily one, Gellert said. If he has done as he said, we must either separate or find a way to get rid of the gnolls quickly. Pardon, Master Gellert, but what are gnolls? Thatch asked. Shirt answered before the bard could speak. Nasty dog-faced things as big as I am. They are mean killers too, and will cheerfully roast you two over a fire. That, boys, Geller added, is no exaggeration, and they'd eat you too after they were done. Ha! That is it is. We'll see to it that you never have to face any gnolls until you are able to deal with them on terms they find not to their liking. Like Master Gord did to the Luzels, Shad said eagerly. Gord was somber. You'd not like that much, Shad. Gallor means that when you are grown fully, trained to fight properly, and have armor and all, you and Touch there will be more than a match for a pair of gnolls. The boy sat back, feeling bigger and more confident. What's to be done, then? Asked the bard, looking at Gord. There had been a subtle change in roles, the young man noted. Over the time he had known Gellor, the one-eyed man had been many things to him. Father-like, a mentor, a leader, a rescuer, and more. The shift had occurred subtly, all right, but it was distinct. Not only was Gellor now treating him as an equal, but at times the bard was deferring to Gord almost as if the young thief were superior. This was a bit disturbing, but there was no time for pondering the matter now. We move ahead, said Gord, and if we find the band of gnolls spread out in our path, you four turn back a ways and stay put. I'll get by them without difficulty, and catch up with Obmi and his filthy train of scum. They'll be deserting the damned dwarf now, not flocking to him. Somewhere along the trail somehow I will get the chance to kill that miserable dastard and gall the second key, the thief said vehemently. I'm certain it is on his twisted body somewhere, and I'll tear him apart to find it. Let's get going, Shart said practically. Listen now, my boys, here's what you two are to do if we meet any of this half-human scum, and there is no way for you to get away. Hold your spears before you thus. And they went on with his instructions as their small group headed for the hard-beaten pathway leading toward the north and the realm of the demoniac youth. They are ahead, all right, Shart muttered as he slipped back to join his friends. He had gone ahead on the path to see if Gord's recounting of the conversation overheard as a small midnight black tomcat had been correct. It was. Gord had said that Obmi had ordered the Gnoll captain, a huge monster named Araraf, to remain behind to prevent any enemy from following, while the remainder of the force went northward as before. Gord said that the Gnoll leader had seemed almost relieved to be given such duty, for the fear of the predatory killer of Luzels was spreading from Ors to Gnoll. Gord nodded. This is where we part, company. Then, maybe if I picked off a few of those fleabag bastards, the rest will take off, Shart said half-heartedly. That will not serve, my friend, so why risk it? Geller said softly. Gord shook the hands of the others, Shart, the bard, Touch, and then little Shed. You kill some for me, the boy said earnestly, and they all looked. Without further ado, Gord left. He went on foot, carrying his weapons and little else. The forest would provide for him. When the dwarf had begun to move at night, they thought they had lost the game. Shert was unable to see the travel and fight in darkness, for he had no magical sight, as did his adult comrades. The lads needed tending. Something had to be found to slow, if not halt, the humanoid band that surrounded and protected the dwarf and his prize. Then Gord had decided to experiment. The cat lord had told him that the ring he wore conveyed the power of lycanthropy, and that Gord could assume cat form at will. The other powers of the ring worked, and Gord had no reason to doubt the Master Cat's word about form change. It was one thing to play at being a cat, to call oneself Black Cat and be a cat burglar. It was quite another to actually become a genuine leopard, or even a domestic cat. Gord had just never wished to be anything other than his human self, but desperate circumstances called for desperate measures. Without telling his companions, the young thief had slipped away and tried the power of the ring. It worked, of course. The transformation took only a minute, and it was only slightly painful. Everything he wore simply became part of his new form somehow. Clothing and boots, weapons, everything. God could see parts of his new body. He was a cat, a big leopard with inky coat and long tail. God the leopard had padded to a nearby pool and peered at his reflection in the water. He looked splendid, handsome, green eyes, long whiskers, a long pinkish red tongue, and huge fangs of gleaming white. How nice it would be to eat some fresh meat, drink from the pool here, and then gaze at his reflection until sleep came. There was a broad, comfortable-looking limb nearby where he could rest too. Gord had to jerk his mind back quickly. How easy it was to fall into the thinking of the form one had assumed, and what would happen if he allowed this to occur. Perhaps he will take animal form more and more, eventually living out his life as leopard, not man. Gord shuddered and willed himself back to his own shape. In a minute he was human again, clothed and equipped as before. As he stood pondering this, Gord recalled the feeling of being a large, powerful cat. He wanted to go back to that form, try the feline muscles, bound and spring, climb and hunt. To see and experience the world as a leopard was an interesting desire. Well, so was drinking alcohol, in a far different but similarly insidious way, and the vapors of herbs, fungi eating, and extractions of certain other substances all had lures that ensnared some humans. God could resist these habits and addictions because he enjoyed life without them. He knew he must do the same with respect to this human-to-cat power he possessed. It must become a tool, used only for purpose necessary to sound cause, and used only when God must. The others heard the news with excitement, not having any of the reservations that God did. When he told them of the strange feelings the change evoked within him, Gallor had shrugged them off, and Shirt had told him to enjoy. Upon reconsideration, he realized that druids and magic users assumed many sorts of forms on a regular basis. Still, this wasn't lycanthropy, was it? Dan Geller had pointed out that the ring had a magical power. So strictly speaking, there was no shape-shifting within Gord, and the wall was less lycanthropic than Curly's ability to become a hawk or a turtle for a brief time. Gord gave up his reservations. He had stalked through the night, bounding along the forest floor, climbing trees and using branches as a roadway, slipping through places two-leggers would find impossible. It had been easy to move ahead of the mass of smelly, noisy humanoids and the gobbling ape creatures who swung clumsily through the branches. It had been the simplest of things to catch and kill the fierce losels, for the stupid creature didn't know enough to flee from certain death. Had it been leopard slaying, baboon, or human slaying, or no matter. When the clubs and small balls had struck him, Gord the leopard felt only small thumps and fly bites. Momentary fear for his safety gave way to feelings of vulnerability and triumph. Now he could single-handedly slay the whole-filthy tribe of two-leggers and get the prize. He had loped full in the face of one gaping losel, causing it to leap groundward, chattering in fear. Reason returned when he saw a stick-thin elfin rose that bespoke magic staring upward at him sometime later. Cat contempt for so puny a creature caused him to stare haughtily down as the puny thing began muttering softly and waving his arms. Gord's ears heard every sound the creatures made, and then the human part of Gord's mind panicked, and the cat portion wrecked by leaping away. Just in time, that great spring, it carried him across some 30 feet to another tree, limbs slightly below the one he'd been upon, and along it to another, all in a second. Behind its black furred tail there was a flash and sizzle of energy, as a lightning stroke hit the spot where its graceful form had lain only a second ago, and Luzel screamed and fell like ripe fruit from the struck tree. Thereafter Gord made an effort, and the human mind always controlled the leopard brain. Gord pondered briefly the dichotomy of thinking. Of course, the power of shape changing will be as useless if the ability to properly utilize the new form were missing. Simplicity itself. The trick was to keep the real mind in power while allowing the new one to handle the body as it was designed to control. Human mind directs, cat mind operates. Easy to visualize, difficulty in the extreme to accomplish. Too much direction and the cat brain was overridden. Then the leopard body became clumsy and unable to perform its natural functioning. On the other hand, too little monitoring, too much freedom, and the cat took over the human portion, submerging it to little more than a vague memory or relegating it to a sort of conscience that could do little but scold or prize. It took an hour, but eventually Gord managed to get the correct balance. By man the company of humanoids had been halted, a perimeter ringed with guards, and alert leaders stationed where they could protect the center of the encampment. Gord the leopard managed to harass the ape hordes, but the exercise was useless. When he saw the leaders of the company gathering to hold some sort of council, he acted at once. If he could assume leopard form so easily, why not that of a small domestic cat? Springing to the ground, Gord concentrated on shifting from leopard to thorn, and in the usual time he was as he wished, a rather large one, but a tomcat nevertheless. In this form, he had crept through the camp to where he could hear the words of the group gathered. Gord the cat arrived just at the conclusion of the meeting. He heard the dwarf tell the huge, heavily armored gnoll who stood respectfully there that he was to block the path. At least that's what it seemed to be, for Gord had scant proficiency with the bastard tongue of orcs and gnolls and the rest of the humanoid species. Sorry, a second. I control T. Well. Good. Well, anyway. The Gnoll chief was recruitant and argued, Obmi instead, telling him that only a weak force could be expected. Something like a few soft men who you will kill and loot, were more like the exact terms the dwarf used. He clinched the wall by mentioning that the cat devil would follow Obmi and the losers. Then Newell had grinned hideously in agreement and gone off. The scouting group will ride well in advance tomorrow morning, the gaunt elf called Keak had said with a cackle. Yes, that is so, the dwarf replied, and then Obmi smiled for the first time since Gord the cat had been watching, crouched in the shadows beneath a low shrub. Clapdoodle, Keak had said with a friendly arm around the orc's wide shoulders. You must come into our tent to get special instructions about your role as chief of the scouting force. The half-breed's ugly face had shown delight at such a display of favor, with Obmi suggesting a bit of wine as they talked. The three had stepped into the tent shared by the elf and dwarf. A ring of guards surrounded it, so there was no way for Gord to get close enough to hear more. Belly brushing the ground, he had slunk from the encampment, shifting into leopard form, and looked to the place where his friends waited. The whole story fascinated them, and then they had checked to see if Gord's interpretation of the conversation had been correct. The presence of over half a hundred of the hyena-faced humanoids was ample confirmation. The gnolls prevented further pursuit by all but Gord, for even if the others managed to slip around the widely spread humanoid band, they could well be caught between gnolls and the main body later. Even with Gord's work, there were several hundred still in the main party. If Luzels and Oars deserted in numbers, 100 men and Oars were still too many when backed by the Toad Dwarf and the spellcaster Keak. Gord's friends would have to remain behind, for only he could now hope to accomplish the mission. Wait a second, sorry. I have to verify one thing. Okay, good. Let's continue. Gord was still uneasy about changing fo- from man to cat. Bashful or ashamed, he wasn't sure which. After the farewell, the young thief moved eastward into the forest, swinging wide to the right-hand side of the pathway. Moving as swiftly as any woodsman, Gord made certain that he was several hundred yards off the trail and well away from the observation of his companions. Then he allowed the transformation to occur. In a minute, a huge black panther stretched itself. The cat yawned almost lazily, flexed its claws, stretched, and then moved like a bolt from an arbalest into the trees. Seconds later, several gnolls moved into the small area left clear by a fallen tree. They peered around carefully, their bows and axe-like barred dishes at the ready, but there was nothing threatening there. One asked another if he had seen something black a moment before. The other grunted a non-committal reply. The humanoids went on with their scouting, looking for humans to kill. It was an easy manner to travel as a leopard through the old trees of the Vespe. The ground below was perfect for running, while the thick interlocking branches above made the highway for a big cat to walk upon. Gord the Panther, and he now simply talked of both human and animal forms as Gord, elected to stay on the leaf-matted forest floor until he approached the main body of Obmi's band. His panther's sense of smell would give him all the warning he needed when he was near. He allowed his human mind to ride that of the cat, so that the feline part received and sorted out sensory information, while the human part gave it identifiers that related to human experience. Odors were the difficult part. Several times during the next few hours, Gord had to scramble madly up a nearby tree in order to avoid other dangerous creatures not accustomed to having a panther intrude on their domain. Not being certain that his immunity to weapons extended to the tusks of a boar or the jaws of a savage brown bear, Gord took flight as the wiser curs. He could not run for long periods, but there were many areas where he could safely rest. Luck seemed to ride with him too. He had caught one of the giant squirrels busy eating fungi, made a fast and delicious meal of it, and was taking a catnap in the leafy crotch of a galda tree when a dozen bugbears padded past as swiftly as great cats. These giant goblins were heading west and seemed to be no part of the humanoid party, still several miles ahead. Gord watched through glowing green panther eyes as the humanoids passed, and the bugbears never realized he was there. Could these big goblins have actually hurt him? Gord wasn't interested in finding out unless he had to. Another time he was taking a drink from a stream when his feline mind seemed uneasy, so Gord allowed it to have its way without seeking to interpret the cause of the tension. The panther jumped at Spot, just avoiding the strike of a huge adder that was lurking at the bank of the watercourse, waiting for unwary prey. It took the whole day for him to catch up with the collection of humanoids and renegade humans traveling toward the realm of use. The company had halted the rest and forage for food. Gord restrained the cat urge to attack the losers he saw. He went wide around them and ahead of the humanoids again. No attacks this time, he reasoned. He would see if the dwarf could be lulled into a sense of security and safety. Then he would strike. Then an idea came to him that satisfied both man and panther. He lay in wait and eventually saw a man venture forth to answer the call of nature. Gord wondered why he would go so far from his fellows, so close to the dark. The brigand drew out a large flask and swig great gulps of its contents. That explained that. He was a lone drinker who did not care to share his liquor with his associates. The panther leaped upon the unsuspecting outlaw and tore out his throat before the fellow knew he had been attacked. Gord was appalled at his desire to strike Tooth, and the panther mind was repulsed at the reek of alcohol and the full stench of the man. They compromised. Panther carried corpse into a tree and hid it, and man assumed the guise of brigand, using the fellow's cloak as a disguise. As he returned to his own form, it suddenly occurred to Gord that the shifting was no longer a dreaded thing. The day of integration between cat and man had been beneficial. It made him realize that he had talked in cat fashion, or as close as a human could come to thinking thus, as long as he could remember. Certainly, when he walked the slender lines, balanced on roof ridges, and ran along the eaves, he was feline, just as his burglar appellation, Black Cat, attested. He could now shift from man to cat and back without hesitation or reservation. There was no sense of ill or unnaturalness in so doing. This made Gord glad, for he had no choice in the matter anyway. As Gord walked into the encampment, he was surprised at the disordered nature of affairs. When he had spied upon it previously, the dwarven leader had kept order and discipline, but this time Obmi had allowed things to slip. The place was in chaos. "What's up, Paul?" a drunken bandit asked as he staggered past Gord to relieve himself against a nearby tree. Nothing, Paul. Got any sauce?" The fellow leered at Gord, patted a half-full skin slung around his shoulder, and slurred. "Yep, but I ain't sharing it unless ya got some to split with your old pal." And he emphasized just who the old pal was by striking himself hard enough on the chest to send himself stumbling backward a couple of steps. "Say, I don't recognize ya. What's your name anyway?" he said, then looked at his own joke. "Ya get it? Anyway." He reeled and looked more. "I sure wish I could get some, and I'll take it anyway. Har har har." "What?" asked the young thief, confused. "Who gives a pinch of coon crap anyway? Anyway, I be thick, and I'm happy to meet a man who's got balls enough to admit he'll get it anyway. What outfit ya with anyway?" God relaxed. This thought was so stupid with booze that he had asked the question and interpreted it as God's name. The dolt was calling him anyway, thinking it was his name. Oh shit. Oh god. That's stupid. That's damn stupid. Sorry a second, I have some issues to resolve. Uh, anyway, that's all. God realized that this very drunken fellow was his ticket into the camp without questioning being asked. God handed him the flask he had taken from his earlier victim, watching to see if the brigand called Tick would recognize it. Tick merely took it and swilled brandly. "Great stuff! By golly, and Pegger got bottles too. Hey, you seen old Pegger around here? He went out to take a dump, and I'll bet the wild ox ate him." "Nah, I ain't seen neither of them," God said. "How come the camp is so relaxed tonight? Yesterday it was all that spit and polish bit, and now old Obmi's let up on us. You know why?" Tick puzzled over that a moment, helping himself to think by taking another pull from the flask of fiery liquor. "That buggering little dwarf is a mean un, and who can tell what's going through that dirty dwarf mind he's got. Yesterday he was a jabbering and cursing and bossing us about all time. Today he just sits on his horse and don't talk at all, and now he's holed up in his fancy acid tent letting us have some fun for change. Hey, what's your outfit again?" Sorry for the difficult English, but it's written pretty bad, so... Um, Loner just came in and sing up with that skinny elf called Keak. "That's funny. I don't recall any loners being taken on." Gord put his arm around Tick's shoulders. "Come on, old pal. Let's go and see if maybe Keak can explain it to you." The outlaw jerked away as if Gord were a leaper. "You full of crap, boy. I ain't going nowhere near that crazy little elf bastard. It's your boss, you go on talk to him. Drawing himself up with as much dignity as he could muster, the drunken brigand staggered away, anxious to find better company. Gord let him go. Before he'd gone a dozen steps, however, Tick turned and came back. Wait a sec, Sham! Keak rode off this morning with that creepy old folk priest. What in hell are you saying? Troubled, drunk as he was, the outlaw was suspicious and not about to let this statement pass as he had the rest. Gord talked fast. Damn, Tick, you're right. That brandy's potent stuff. Want another swig? Suspicious or not, Tick couldn't pass that up. Okay, and then you and me better seek up the sawtooth and get things straight. Gord hit him solidly over the head with the pommel of his dagger, and the brigand collapsed without a sound. The brandy spilled out over him, and Gord let him lay where he was. Passed out in drunken stupor, from all appearances, Tick would sleep for hours. Gord doubted anyone in the camp would be interested. There was already sufficient commotion to awaken the dead. Singing and shouting, arguing and fighting, and all the rest of the things typical of a disorganized collection of brigands and humanoids, met for a rollicking good time. Something was certainly wrong. Gord approached the command tent. A motley collection of men and humanoids surrounded it at a distance of about 10 paces. A bugbear challenged him in barely intelligible common speech. Get your ass out of here, man! Not even a dog passes here! Putting on his most ferocious scowl, Gord faced the humanoid thing, glaring a challenge up at the towering form. Your ass, Harry! Captain Sawtooth sent me with a message for Obmi, personal like. Give him the message, and I'll pass it on, the bugbear said with a truculent sneer. Crap too, dumbass. You think the captain wants a big jerk like you knowing important information for the boss? Yeah, smart-mouthed little man. Is that so? How come I let you know if it's so damn important? Gord put on an expression of mixed relief and chagrin. Okay, big guy, so you ain't so stupid as you look. Now, I know why they put you on guard duty here, he added, as if amazed that he had to admit being outwitted by the giant goblin. I guess you can keep a secret. Bet your fat human ass I can, the guard snapped back. Well, you got it now. Here goes. Only lean close so is all the camp don't hear it. The bugbear did, keeping a wary eye upon Gord as he did so. Captain Sawtooth said that Obmi should come quick. That bastard of a Black Panther is over by our position, but it don't know where we spotted it. Sawtooth, it thinks it's waiting till things quiet down before it starts eating us again. Flogging foogish, the bugbear exclaimed, referring to some god the giant goblins worshipped casually and swore by often. Yeah, I'm shitting me, are you? I don't want my head bashed in. Would kid about that sort of stuff. Why I continue to lose? Okay, anyway. Right, buddy. You go in and tell Lord Obmi. Gord demurred. No way. You said you would if I told you the message. The bugbear struck it to his full 7¼ feet and sneered. Dog turds airless. Your captain sent you, and I'm passing you through the line. Tell the dwarf yourself. Gord stamped past without a word, making it appear that he truly believed he was going to his own execution. The bugbear gave a snarling chuckle behind him and returned to his task of standing and looking bored. When he got the entrance of the small tent, Gord coughed and said, Message for Lord Obmi from Captain Sawtooth. Enter, a voice said. Gord went inside, not having to feign nervousness. There he saw Obmi, seated in a dwarf-sized chair, gnawing at a hunch of some sort of meat and drinking wine. The dwarf looked up and asked him what his message was. The voice was wrong. As a beggar, thief, and confidence man himself, Gord knew this wasn't the real Lord Obmi. It looked like the dwarf, but the voice had a slightly different timbre, and the mannerisms were wrong. He was an impostor. Gord cleared his throat and replied, It's the big black leopard, Lord Obmi. Captain Sawtooth seen it near our position. The dwarf swallowed a mouthful of meat and washed it down with wine. So, get back to Sawtooth and tell him I said to take care of it himself. Don't bother me again. Yes, sir, but... But what? The dwarf asked with annoyance. I told you to get out of there. Yes, sir. Only Sawtooth wanted me to show you this ring he found when the panther was nearby. It's a great-looking cat's eye stone in it, too. Gord concluded ingenuously, holding out his ring toward the seated dwarf. Hand it to me, then, you churl, and clear out. As he said this, the Obmi impostor, Alf, rose and stretched out his hand for the glittering gold ring that Gord cupped in his left palm. Gord struck then. His needle-pointed dagger was in his right hand before the dwarf knew what was happening. Gord's arm flashed up and punched out with a force sufficient to penetrate even enchanted steel armor, for the blade had power over metal. The poniard pierced the plate, protecting the dwarf's body as if it were leather. The false Obmi screamed in pain as the point bit through his shoulder and toward his heart. To me! The dwarf managed to croak, loud enough to be heard by the sharp-eared bugbear guard. The giant goblin immediately rushed toward the tent entrance, calling for his fellows to follow as he did so. Gord stopped the impostor again as the dwarf tried to stand. Then, desperately jamming the proffered ring back on his finger, the young adventurer pulled out his sword. The hulking bugbear burst into the tent at the very moment, nearly pulling the structure down in his rush to be inside and aid its leader. Grarg! The humanoid screamed his war cry as he came. Swinging a huge morning star in the confines of the tent was a problem the bugbear hadn't considered, however. He swung the massive spike-headed club up to strike Gord, and the sharp projections pierced the canvas and immediately became entangled in it. As the startled bugbear brought the club and tent down, Gord thrust his sword and dagger both into the creature's exposed chest and belly. The folds of falling canvas blinded the giant goblin, even as he let go of its morning star and clutched at his wounds. Two more quick thrusts made certain that the creature would never recover from his condition. Dropping to his hands and knees, Gord heaved open the small chest that served as the dwarf's table. If the second key was anywhere in the tent, it was in this coffer. The canvas had fallen all the way down, and the lantern that had illuminated the place had been knocked down and broken in the struggle. Flames were licking the oiled cloth now, and in a moment the whole thing would go up in a roaring blaze. Outside, several of the other guards were trying vainly to find a way inside the collapsed tent, while others of their number were shouting an alarm to the rest of the camp. Gord's searching fingers found bottles, cloth, and a leather bag. It was unlikely, but the pouch might be something. He thrust that into his belt even as he slashed at the tent cloth nearest him, and concentrated immediately on changing his form. Lord Obmi! Lord Obmi! A man cried, poking at the fallen canvas as he did so. One corner of the tent was now blazing. Spears lifted the other hand to allow the dwarf to escape if he could. All of the canvas was burning now, and the brigands were moving back, driven off by the heat. As spears and polearms lifted what remained of the tent, one of the humanoids crashed down and crawled forward to rescue the dwarf. A snarling black leopard tore half of the man-over's face away with a swipe of its claws. Then the big cat was in the midst of the rest, a whirlwind of clawing, biting fury. "Save your ass!" an outlaw shouted as he dropped the glaive he had been holding and ran away in terror. The others with him weren't so lucky. Gord bit an oar on the leg, disabling him, then leaped upon a bugbear, tearing the humanoid with claws and teeth as he tried to pull his attackers off with his huge hairy hands. A spear thrust grazed harmlessly of Gord's flank, and the deflected point went downward into the bugbear's thigh. The goblin giant fell, and Gord immediately left off his attack on the creature in favor of another victim. He sprang full into the midst of a group of men and oars, knowing instinctively that any attack on him from a distance would be virtually impossible, while he was surrounded by the brigands. Amid the screams and shouts and wildly flailing weapons, Gord the Leopard exacted the terrible tool. He didn't try to kill any one of the outlaws or humanoids, only to wound them with fang and claw. Their blows went unnoticed, and he gradually gave his human mind over to bloodlust and the urge to bring vengeance upon this malicious killer. Suddenly the press melted away, and he was standing amid a circle of fallen foes. A little distance away 3 foemen still held their ground. In fact, they were advancing cautiously toward him. This was too good to be true. Gord crouched, bunching his steel muscles to spring upon these foolish ones. Then his human mind registered a fact that enabled him to override feline fury. These opponents were bearing wicked-looking weapons and ready to take its charge on the gleaming tip of spear, sword, and scimitar. Magic weapons! Instead of leaping ahead onto the waiting blades, Gord sprang sideways. A bolt caught his hind leg nonetheless. It barely grazed his ebony coat, but the path it left burned, and he let out a startled yowl of pain as he landed and bounded off again. There was a shout of triumph from whoever had loosed the enchanted missile and wounded him, while the other three, a renegade human, a half-orc, and a particularly big bugbear, cursed and ran after him. Gord ran flat out for the safety of the nearby forest, not caring to find out just how magical the weapons threatening him were. The spear the giant goblin waved whistled overhead and buried itself in the ground just a few feet in front of him. On an impulse, Gord managed to bring himself to a sudden stop. Having four legs is a real advantage at such times, his human mind thought, even as his cat one was causing his massive jaws to clamp fast on the quivering spear shaft. Then he was running again, bounding between the giant trees the ragtag brigands hauled after the escaping were leopard, with the bugbear whose enchanted spear had been just stolen, yelling the loudest of all. Safe in a tree, pacing along the upper ward of the forest, Gord Panther decided it was high time to rest and assess the situation. Only a few of the bravest of the band had dared to follow the three leaders into the woods in pursuit of the fleeing leopard. Gord had easily evaded the chase, climbing a tree and then moving swiftly from limb to limb. After a few minutes, the humans and humanoids had seized their halo and returned to their encampment. Gord still held the enchanted spear fast in his leopard teeth. He realized that biting on the shaft made his teeth ash, and he spat it out on the broad limb he rested on. There were no indentations in the wood from his fangs. It was a potent weapon indeed. The collection of bandits and humanoids will be breaking up even now, Gord thought. Without knowing that they had been deserted by their leader, they will think the body of the dwarf in the burned tent was their master. Without either Keak or Obmi to keep them in line, natural hostilities, bullying, and difference will send the motley assembly into separate bands immediately. The losers will certainly remain intact as a group. They will probably seek to inform their ultimate master of what had happened. The men will split from the Oars and a few other sorts of humanoids, bugbears, gnolls, and an old Norker or Svart, will side with one or another of these parties, according to where they thought they'd be least likely to be killed. Tomorrow morning there will be nothing left save the litter, and refuse the brigands left behind. All of the groups would avoid going in the direction of the tribal lands of gnolls left behind to the south. These humanoids will only kill or enslave men or orcs who came their way, there being no need to have more concern for the safety of his comrades and the two boys with Galler and shirt. Gord pondered the problem of the Obmi impostors and Keak's absence from the encampment. The answer was not long in coming. Once again the dwarf had callously abandoned his company to whatever fate held in store for them. He and Keak must have simply ridden on, leaving the rest to bear the brunt of things. Very well then, Obmi was a day ahead, but he surely had the second key with him. To make certain, Gord shifted to his own shape long enough to check out the leader poke. It held an assortment of coins equal to about a gold piece in value. The impostor had died for that sum, nothing more, for these creatures of evil certainly had no loyalties. Resuming Panther form, Gord again took the captured spear in his mouth and headed northward. End of chapter 25. A pretty long one, I have to admit. Ah, 45 minutes to this. Whoa. And a lot of message on my on my cell phone. Well, it's pretty strange. Let's continue, shall we? Good. Uh, the, chapter 26, a brief one now, because this one is very, very long. This one was very, very long. There, another chapter. Chapter blah 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 blah. Blah 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 blah. Chapter 26. They come this way, Shart said. Gallor nodded grimly. Then it is time we showed this pack of yapping jackals what it is like to face man. The barbarian had gone to spy on the gnolls, blocking the route north. Although they had moved their own camp several miles southward and well off the trail, the two men still felt uneasy, so Shart had volunteered to scout the enemy. If they had not had the two lads with them, Gallor and the woodland-raised barbarian would have simply slipped away until the humanoid tribe had wandered off elsewhere. Touch and Shed were village bred. They had some skill at woodcraft, but certainly it was insufficient for what was demanded now. This put the two adventurers in a quandary. I can set a deadfall or two, Shert said. Good. I'll use a bit of druidical power to prepare some surprises too. Shert, be ready with your bow, the one-eyed bird said. I want you to feather as many of those hyena heads as you can, and don't spare the shafts. Shert looked shocked. Shoot away all the arrows? That will leave us with no defenses save spear and sword. There you are wrong, my friend, Geller said with a meaningful smile. You see the little snares I placed to discomfit the enemy are just an annoyance? I have a far warmer welcome plan for that dreadful band of murdering humanoids. The bard began explaining his plan, Shert nodding and occasionally adding some detail or asking a question. As Geller concluded his exposition, the massive barbarian was grinning and slapping his thigh. That will indeed do for them. What about the lads? The one-eyed man ceased his smiling. There's no help for that. We'll have to use them in the initial stage, for show only. I hope, and I'll give them what aid I can even for that. Shart agreed that it was the best hope they had. Staying put was out of the question. Abandoning the lads was unthinkable, and there was no way of avoiding the gnolls when the two boys were along. They had to bring the fight to the humanoids, and that fight had to go in their favor. Geller called the two boys over and gave them a brief outline of what was to be done. Now you two stay put here. Be ready with your weapons, for we'll be back to get you soon enough. And then you are going to help us fox those man-eaters for sure, right? Right, Thatch and Shed cried in unison. Now, both of you paint yourselves with that green and brown past I made up. Put it wherever your skin shows. And help each other. I want you two to look as fierce and savage as any wild woods roamer does. Smiling and laughing at the prospect, the lads hurried to comply. It was like a game to them, for they didn't fully understand the full nature of the whole matter. The man turned away and went into the forest to set the stage. The heavy log fell suddenly, and the gnoll beneath it was dead in that instant. His neck broken, his fellows snarled in shock, froze, and peered here and there. One barked a syllable or two, pointing ahead on the trail. There was another trap there, their teeth bared in feral attitude. The 9 remaining humanoids moved off the path to the right and left, stalking ahead in search of the man who dared to do this to one of their number. Bowel limbs sprang upward with Evie's wishing sounds, and another pair of gnolls were caught in the traps. They were not so effective though. Each of these victims was simply suspended by one of his legs, nooses holding them dangling a few feet above the ground. With rude comments and looks, another pair of their comrades went to cut them down. Both would-be liberators were struck by cloth-yard shafts as they attempted to cut the snares free. As the wounded humanoids fell, their companions took cover, their own bows and arrows ready to return the compliment. A sudden piercing shriek sounded to the gnoll's right, and ahead there was motion in the foliage. They loosed several shafts at the unseen enemy, and in return one of the humanoids was struck by a pair of arrows that killed him on the spot. Several of the gnolls started to advance, moving carefully from tree to tree. Then another gave a startled bark as it was jerked suddenly into the air by a snare. This humanoid had been coiled about his neck, however, and the cry was instantly shocked off as the cord broke its neck. When humans armed with spears and painted in savage camouflage were seen moving toward them, darting from tree to tree, the five unwounded gnolls ran back up the trail, leaving their pair of wounded comrades to their fate. "Where is the second one?" Geller hissed. Shirt, wiping his axe clean on the rugged cape worn by one of the gnolls, shrugged. "He should be near to your location. That's where he fell when my broad arrow took him." The barbarian replied in a low voice as he jerked the arrow free from the corpse at his feet. Then the giant hillman dashed across the hard-packed trail and joined his comrade in the brush on the other side of the pathway. "This looks like a splash of blood," the bard said as Shirt came up. "It must be heading toward the lads." "Hurry, we can!" And the snarly cry interrupted the barbarian in mid-sentence. Shirt and Geller ran toward the sound as fast as they could. Shrill shouts answered the initial cry. Then there was a terrible sound, and a shanding log, consisting of barking cogs, suddenly halted midway in its rise toward the high-pitched whining giggle typical of gnoll war cries. Both men were certain of what they'd find, and Shirt regretted ever having allowed the poor boys to accompany them into the Vesve on this deadly quest. "I'll fry that monkey hide off the dog-faced bastard while he yet breathes," Shirt wowed as they came to the place where Shad and Thatch were to remain after showing themselves briefly to the gnolls. Geller was ashen-faced. "It's my fault. I should never have used boys to do man's work." "What do you mean, boys?" a shrill voice challenged. "Thatch and I are warriors." There beside the path stood the two lads. Shad seemed to be nursing a broken arm, and he looked pale, while his bigger comrade was bleeding from a long gash across his chest. At their feet was the wounded gnoll, a bastard sword still clutched in his dead hand, and two boar spears buried in abdomen and neck. "Damned if you aren't warriors!" exclaimed Shirt proudly. "Let me see those wounds," the bard said more practically and with real concern. "There's going to be a lot more happening very soon, and you two are going to have to be in shape to run as fast as you can." "No," Shad said sternly, if weakly. "Thatch and I aren't running from enemies ever again." The young barbarian looked at this assertion. "Let me tell you one thing, boys, warriors. You'll run plenty after this, and often enough it too. Unless I don't know anything about battle. I've done it many a time in the past, and I expect to do it soon again. Who wants to die uselessly?" Thatch and Shad looked surprised at that. "You have run from enemies?" Thatch asked with disbelief and scorn. "Yes," Geller interjected. "So have I. So has every soldier was faced with a situation where dying will do no good for his cause. It has been called a retreat or a retrograde movement, but in truth it is running away to be able to fight another day. Now hold still while Shirt and I tend to injuries. We have only a few minutes." The one-eyed bard employed the arts of druidical healing to set and mend the broken arms. For Shad's forearm had been fractured by a chance hit from the gnoll just before he died. Luckily the flat of the blade had been involved. Otherwise, Geller had told the groaning lad sternly, his arm would have been severed. Shad was less eager to be a warrior after all that. "You are going to be well soon enough, although I can get that broken bone mended as quickly as I like," Geller told the lad when he had finished his ministration. "Keep that sling on, and don't move your arm. Even with my spells of healing, it will take a few days for the bones to knit together and all the internal damage to be set right. Don't fret, Tug," he added hastily as he noted the warrior expression on Shad's thin face. "You'll be right as rain soon enough." Shirt, meanwhile, had cleaned up the long cut that crossed the upper part of Thatch's boy's chest. The barbarian had made a compress of herbs that stung, for Thatch had let out a cry of pain when the stuff was placed there. Silence, warrior, Shart had ordered with a stony face. In my clan, such an outcry will bring disgrace until a brave deed expunged the shame of making noises at such little hearts as that. Thatch was still shamefaced when Gellor came over and examined the wound. The cut wasn't very deep, and Shart had cleaned and cared for it well. Without ridicule or art, the next step the barbarian would have taken was to sew the wound closed with bone needles and sinew. Fortunately for the lad, the bird was able to bring the parted flesh and skin together in a reddish seam without benefit of such painful process. Shart pretended to shake his head in scorn, calling such means of healing soft. Thatch did not complain at all. Almost as good as new, Gellert told him weakly after touching the wound one last time. In later years, girls will admire the scar, and you'll undoubtedly tell them awful lies about how you gained such a warrior's badge, but let that be as it may. He spoke the both of the lads then. Up and on your way, both of you fledgling warriors. As veterans of battle, you both know that neither of you can help Shart and me now, for worrying about wounded comrades is a hindrance. Thatch helped Shad by carrying part of his gear. He'll want that spear of his in hand, but he mustn't tote anything more along, for his wound is more severe than yours. Head back to the south as fast as you can. Stay off the path, keep together, and be quiet. Understand? When both of the boys nodded solemnly, Gellor added, Fine, when you have gone not less than a league, find a safe place to hide out. We will come back for you as soon as we can, and we will be back. Remember that. Off with you now, lads, and luck be with you. Thatch and Shad bobbed their heads and left without a word. Gellor smiled at that, and Shard gave a small chuckle. The two were certainly growing into men, and veteran fighters too. From all this, the massive hillman looked at his friend and asked, What can I do in this next part? Stay close to me, and keep any enemy at a distance. My spell should do the rest. Both men were carefully concealed within a few minutes of the boy's departure. The bard had little piles of oak leaves, mistletoe, and olive berries before him. Shart had his great longbow strung, and a full quiver of arrows on his hip, while a half-dozen extras were thrust into the ground, ready for easy seizure and knocking. They didn't have long to wait. The hunting pack of humanoids came through the trees with terrible rapidity. They were nearly silent as they trotted along, with only occasional shrill, yapping sounds that served for both command and force alignment. A dozen of the gnolls went along the path, while a score flanked them to either hand. Nearly half carried bows, while the remainder had a motley assortment of arms. But all these weapons were terrible: two-handed sword, huge morning stars, glaive gisarms, and similar polearms. Many also had heavy throwing spears in addition to their other weapons, while those carrying the 7-foot bows had axes or broadswords for close combat thrust into their belts. At least their master armed them well enough before throwing them to their fate, Shart whispered to the bard when he saw the weapons. Gellor replied, They'll do them no good, you'll see. Lively now, loose those shafts of yours. Shart began drawing and releasing as rapidly and with as much care as the situation allowed. His thickly muscled arms tensed, and the mighty longbow bent into a near half circle as he drew the arrow back until the broad razor-edged head touched the hornwood staff and the fletched feathers tickled its cheek. A sharp twang and 40 inches of that flew unerringly toward its target. These all occurred in a single smooth motion. Knocking of arrow, draw, and tree, fingered release. Each shaft sunk so that only its feathered tail showed that another gnoll bore the mark of the barbarian archery. Never had Shart shoot faster, and his fingertips, calloused as they were, burned from the exercise. As soon as the gnolls realized they were under attack, they took cover and began an answering release of arrows. 4 were wounded before they understood they were facing their human foes, and another pair were struck even as the first shafts flew from the humanoid's bows. A huge missile nicked the barbarian's ear, another glanced off his chainmail shirt. A third pierced his thigh and went cleanly through, and yet a fourth lodged lodged itself harmlessly between waist and girdle. As he had been told, Shirt stood fast, exposed as he was, and continued to send his deadly arrows into the snarling enemy, now only 100 paces away and slowly creeping nearer. The gnolls were certain that this was a trap. This lone bowman was but a decoy to draw them nearer so that the other man-things could fall upon them, or so that traps that were certainly nearby could snare them as they had previously. Just as the hyena-like humanoids were certain of this, they also knew that there were but a few humans opposing them. They, the nonuls of the Bloody Fanged tribe, were not to be so easily taken by such tricks. Not this time. They had found where the weak humans had laid their traps, and in springing them they had taken losses. That was the way of life. Now they will drive the men away from their prepared place, avoid the traps, and hunt these little creatures down. What joy to hurry them, running and panting, through the forest! Soon the men would be helpless and begging for death, those who lived through the chase and capture. Most will fall in the hunt, but the gnolls hoped some would live to provide amusement and entertainment before the feast of victory began. Then there will be much good eating, for whether roasted or raw and bloody, man flesh was sweet and tasty. Tre Yigu, chieftain of the warband, signaled the crucial advance. The lone man had ducked out of sight after another well-sped arrow from one of the Tre Yigu's warriors had struck him. Whoa, a very hard name to read, believe me. Soon the hunt will begin, and he and his warriors will be bounding after men running in fear from their ferocity. Two more arrows arced into the gnoll position, and Waldoki's shot found the target. The leader of the band snarled and stood up. It was time to charge this man. A large black beetle crawled onto the humanoid's foot and up his legging unnoticed. It had large sharp pincers, and in a second these mandibles were buried in tough hide drawing blood. With an oath, the hulking humanoid bent to squash the offending bug, but just then it was bitten by a large dart fly, and stung by a bumblebee that had alighted on his mangy shoulder. Troyigu, proud chieftain of the Bloody Fangs tribe, let out a yelp suitable for a gnoll whelp, and began swatting at himself in an unwarrior-like manner. The frenzied beating of various portions of his own anatomy continued as insects of every type crawled, hopped, and flew around the gnoll. They bit and stung, and entered ear and eye without regard for their lives. Now the chieftain was not alone in his torment, for every one of his fellow warriors was likewise swarmed with a plague of insects. This evidently served as no comfort to the chieftain whatsoever, for a moment later he was running madly through the forest, caroming off trees, trying to swat away the biting things even as he fled in madness from their attack. Gallor and Shirt killed 3 of the crazy gnolls as they blundered into the place where the men were. Shirt was only slightly wounded, and he still had a half quiver of arrows. He felled 2 of the humanoid creatures thus. Gallor broke the other down with his earless spear, and then he finished the job with a swift stroke of his sword. Both adventurers then hastily removed themselves from the area, lest the overflow of insects begin to distress them as they had the gnolls. Shirt actually felt a momentary pity for the half-dozen wounded ones who thrashed and howled under coats of crawling death. Unable to get clear of the area of infestation, these gnolls had died horribly, beaten and stung to death slowly by hundreds of enraged insects. As if reading his mind, the bard told him, "They will not have allowed you so easy as that, barbarian." Shirt knew that his friend spoke the plain truth, and without further feeling, he left the shan behind. What of the others? He asked Gallor. Will they rally and come again to hunt us? Those who escaped will bear the marks of their encounter with the little ones of the forest for many days to come. The bard told his friend, "If they rally at all, it will be far away from this place, and the survivors will seek some easier prey to inflict their plundering and cruelty upon." Shirt shook his head, sorry now that any of the fair creatures had escaped, for they will surely hurry and slay man and demi-man elsewhere. As long as they lived, gnolls and their humanoid brethren will fight endlessly to conquer and slay humans and their allies, elves, halfling, and the rest. When they finally found Touch and Shed several hours later, the boys demanded to hear all the details of the victory. The two boys kept both men up half the night, retelling and elaborating on the judgment. Even though they were still sore from their previous brush with a lone and wounded mule, both boys wished in their hearts that they had been with Gallor and Shirt when they brought doom upon the humanoids. End of chapter 26. Two chapters of full action. Now, the last chapters of today. I think tomorrow and then the next time I hand the book, if I continue with this mm, rhythm, tenue, I don't know. Anyway, chapter 27. And it's pretty dark, and I have the screen of my computer illuminate me enlightened me. I am enlightened. Okay, anyway, sorry for that. Really, really sorry for that. So, chapter 27. The soft thudding of hooves came steadily closer. Oh, sorry. The forest around the well-used track of pocket clay was as silent as a tomb. Now the horses and their riders came into view around the turn in the pathway. A pair of men-horses rode in front, small arbalets across their laps, lances and swords slung. They wore dirty cloaks of dull brown that failed to conceal the chainmail that was beneath the cloth. As tall and vigilant as these half-breeds were, the riders behind were more fearsome in aspect, though smaller in size. A broad and knotty-limbed dwarf in steel plate came with a hammer half as big as he, held casually in one hand. Beside him rode a thin-featured elf, whose gaunt face matched his thin form perfectly. This elf was old, but not elderly, as it showed in lines and in the eyes that started forth from his narrow face. The robed demi-human smiled and giggled for no apparent reason, and a terrible madness shone forth from his bulging eyes. Behind this ill-matched pair were two more horned figures, men in armor and bearing many weapons, but they scarcely mattered. Such riders were insignificant in comparison to the evil power of the two who went before. Hidden in the boughs above, 6 or 7 caches pressed their green-colored hides closer to the branches they clung to and were silent. The terrible aura that radiated from these riders through the vastly was sufficient to freeze these predatory fiends of the forest into fearful hiding. What they had thought might be prey was certainly something vastly different, and the kitches were not so stupid as to stir an inch until the sound of the hoof fall was no longer heard. The life of the forest became active and made sounds only then. As fearsome as these distant relatives of Trollkind were, the silence had not been because of their presence amidst the trees. Their leader pointed westward, and all of the things swung away through the branches. There was easier prey to be had, and the big female who headed up the band smelled loosely in the breeze. Below, already well distant, the 6 riders went along the trail. "Those kitches were scared silly," Keak giggled. "Too bad we are pressed for time," the dwarf agreed. "Killing a few of those sort will be great sport, for they are tough and die hard." "Oh, never fear, Lord Obmi. I'd have softened them up a bit before your hammer knocked them over and spread their contents for fertilizer," the elf cackled. Obmi frowned at his companion. "You dare to spoil my sport? Rot your skinny pizzle, Keak. Some day you'll go too far. I'd not be pleased if you did such work, for I wish to know if it will take one blow or two to bring down one of those green squirrel kings." Giggling merrily, Keak ran his gaze from the enchanted hammer to the magic girdle the dwarf wore around his thick middle. The elf wondered just how great a power these two things conveyed to this one he had to call his liege lord. No matter if the time ever came, it would be when he had neither nearby to aid him. Keak gave a series of cocking sounds as he considered the prospects of such a time, and then went back to watching the surrounding forest for possible enemies. It wouldn't do at all to be taken by surprise. Obmi, in the meantime, having a fair idea as to the mind of his long-known associate, made a mental vow never to be in a position where the elf would have the advantage over him. They had come a full 2 days away from the useless accumulation of weaklings they had abandoned. Keak had used a simple spell to make Obmi appear to be the half-orc cleric, while the dupe of a priest had been changed to look as if he were Obmi himself. The dwarf had to admit that the alteration was certainly much to the mongrel's physical enhancement, while Obmi could hardly wait to be sufficiently clear of the encampment to have Keak remove the humour that had made his marvellous features ugly. The dwarf wondered idly what would become of the fools behind. No good, he knew. The question was how long it would take for the priest to blunder or for some other event to bring the whole group into disaster. Well, no matter. Let even fat old Hughes rant and rave about his precious subjects. Losels and the rest be damned. He, Obmi the Great, was responsible for the location and safe delivery of the mighty second key of the artifact of all evil. Let us hope we are not interfered with before we reach our ultimate destination. Obmi muttered without realizing it. What? The elven mage asked in a startled tone. Do you sense some danger? Obmi, dismayed by his own blunder, shook his iron grey locks and sent a steady glare at his companion. No, forget it. I merely referred to having some others sent by Lord Hughes intercept us before we personally brought our prize to the master. What matter a welcoming party to see us safely to the Raka? Funkin, will you share our glory with undeserving nobodies who only come at the last? He cackled but said nothing further, knowing he'd get precious little credit for his major role in the whole affair, and wishing all the glory could go to him alone. Behind them came an agent who would interfere, and this one had no thought of stealing glory from either. He sought only their death. He raced through the forest, tail streaming, tongue lolling like a dog. The Kish spied him, but the leader saw that this leopard was as large as a lion and unnaturally muscular. The panther stopped to glare at the green-hided things. It spat out the spear it carried in its teeth in order to issue a roaring challenge at them. This cry, so filled with hate for fullness and evil as it was, almost broke the Kitches into battle, but the old female who led them made the others ignore it. Why fight this dark champion of good? It radiated a power that was different, but just as fell as that which came from those riders they had so feared. Since it was alone, they might triumph, but at what cost? Besides, cat meat was pungent and bad tasting. The Kitches swung on toward the tempting odor that came from the west, and the great leopard picked up its strange burden and was off through the upper highway again. Gord was angry at himself for the challenge he had given to the fiendish-looking things he had just encountered. He allowed his antipathy for their obvious evil to be voiced in a roaring cog of pure feline hatred. He must watch it more carefully in the future, disallowing the admixture of man and panther to form an integral mind that was neither human nor animal. It was so naturally melding, though, that he knew he would have to exercise continual control to avoid, or Gord and Leopard would be inextricably bound into a new single entity. A brief time later, his ears detected the drumming and sound of a fair number of horses trotting ahead. The noise told him that the animals moved along the path. Gord increased his pace, which he had slackened after meeting the Kitches, back to a run once more. He hated the feeling of his tongue dangling from the side of his mouth, but it being there cooled and refreshed his tired body, and it was the best he could manage while bearing the magical spear in his teeth. He had tried to make it a part of him, as his other weapons were, but for some reason the transformation from man to cat would not accept the captured spear. This alone made Gord all the more determined to bear it with him when he pursued the hated Obmi. He stayed well away from the party that rode below, for Gord felt that they would be unnaturally aware of a presence such as his, but he kept them in sight and could pick up occasional snatches of the conversation between the malign dwarf and the unbalanced elf who served him. Upon hearing the mention of unwanted intrusion, Gord had a flash of inspiration. Slowing his pace, he moved perpendicular to the trail for a few dozen bounds, then paralleled it for a much longer time, nearly exhausting himself in the race to get as far ahead of the six riders as possible. Eventually he had to slow down. Moving at a fast walk, Gord allowed his cat lungs to draw great gasps of air, and his tired muscles to unknot themselves. As he allowed his failing form to slow and cool itself, he mentally reviewed his plan. After a quarter of an hour of pacing thus, he dashed ahead again, then leaped down onto the track in a series of incredible bounds. A minute later, Gord stepped from behind an ash tree. He went on two legs now, and the feeling was as strange as other changes in his senses that came with man-form. Shape-shifting will take much getting used to, not the form differences, for that part was only a matter of understanding how the mind must mesh with the feline instincts of the new body. But the abrupt changes in locomotion and senses were a bitch for sure. No time for useless reflection now, though. Gord began striding purposefully down the pathway, carrying the spear gently as he headed south. In a minute he heard the sound of a distant hoofbeats. Gord stopped and whistled the mournful air he'd once heard in a dive near the ravening Stoink, the bandit city. He stood stock still, continuing the tune as the sound of the party approaching grew nearer. Suddenly the leading horsemen spurred their mounts toward him at a gallop, lances leveled for the hill. At the very last moment before their points struck, Gord used the spear he held to vault over their heads. The stupid half-breeds thundered on down the trail, wondering what had just occurred, while Gord flipped upright and bowed to the two figures who now stared at him, with suspicion and malign intent. Lord Obmi, Lord Keak, the young thief said with formal dignity and humble demeanor. I greet you in the name of Yuz, ancient and exalted Lord of Evil. The wicked-eyed dwarf spoke first. Just who, pray tell, are you to greet me thus? A humble servant of our master, Lord Obmi, Gord said with a self-effacing tone. I am a negligible person altogether, called Stot. Tell me before I kill you, then, Stot, what madness made you dare to stand before me? It is not by my own whim that I come to you thus, Lord Obmi. I am sent by he who sired Lord Yuz. Gord said with pride, hiding the fact that he hadn't the slightest idea what demon had fettered the foul Yuz, and left his spawn to black the word. Fattered, not fettered, fattered. You serve Grast? Keak interjected. For what reason does that one send you to us? Silence, fool, the dwarf said, his face blackened by anger at the elf's interruption. Now he would not be able to test this cookie fellow who stood before him with the question he had planned. Obmi watched silently for a few heartbeats as the two half-orc guards came racing back to point their lances at the fellow's exposed back. The man was brave enough, he'd give him that. The dark-haired fellow never moved a muscle or gave so much as a glance as the riders thundered toward his naked back. Obmi spoke then, as the guards looked at him for direction. Hold, you brainless bags of shit. I am questioning this man now. Had he been an enemy, you had have left me exposed to his onslaught with your useless charging. The dwarf turned back to Gord. Very well then, Stot. Let's assume for the moment that you are who you claim, and that you serve Lord Yu's loving sire. Why does that one send you to me? Gord smiled ingratiatingly. Prince Grasden conveyed word to me by means of a Hwosit, Lord Obmi, not personally, so what I relate to you is third hand. However, the Demoling, Schwartz by name, was most explicit in relating the commands of Graz, and I shall be the same in telling you. Leave off naming of names, especially those of ones of power. The dwarf stormed, an ominous stone in his shout. And get on with it now, or by the rusted rump of the father of this, I'll smear your smiling face across yon tree. Gord was glad for the interruption. He had hoped that his telling wasn't as noticeable as he thought it was, for he was having to invent his tale on the spot. Furthermore, all the speaking aloud of the demon's name was dangerous business, and he feared it would attract unwanted attention from Grast or his real minions. That this naming made Obmi and Keak too as nervous as a new-made thief about to pick his first pocket delighted guard. These wicked demi-humans were more afraid of the demon father of use than he was. Of course, the thought flashed through his mind, the two undoubtedly had cause to be, for they knew far more of such foolish beings than Gord ever hoped to. Still smiling rather fixedly, Gord inclined his head briefly in homage to the dwarf's command and went on. Sure, the Hwosit who serves the one who shall no longer be named told me that I was to venture southward along the secret road through the Vesve. There I will meet a dwarf of much importance and a powerful elven mage called Keak. The dwarf, called Lord Obmi, will be bearing something of great import to Lord Use. My orders were simply to seek you out. Sorry for that. Once I had found you, I was to serve you in whatever fashion you deemed appropriate. Once you have been conveyed safely to Lord Use, the one said I will be free to go where I wished, unless Lord Use had use for my services. Keak was peering closely at him, but the admonition by the dwarf had silenced the elf. It was Obmi who responded to Gord's statement. Really? What services do you offer? God felt more confident now. As you saw in ample demonstration, my lord, I am far more suited to guard your person than those two who sit foolishly at my back with their clumsy lances. I could kill both without trouble. I am also a skilled thief and have some small talent at woodcraft, trekking, scouting out ambuscades, disguise, impersonation, gambling, and a few lesser arts employs as well. Obmi never blinked at the exposition, and Gord wondered if he had gone too far in daring to mention impersonation. The dwarf nodded and commented, Modesty is not amongst those many parts. No matter. I'll teach you that soon enough in my services. Being so wonderful as you claim, a small test is in order. Is it not, Master Stot? Gord felt sudden tension but replied mildly, As my lord Obmi wishes. Obmi screamed, Kill this arrogant man! The two guards lunged with their sharp-pointed lances immediately, their horses going forward as they did so. Before the metal tips contacted his leather-clad back, damn. Gord was bunched into a ball, tumbling backward between the trampling hoofs of the nervous horses. Then he was on his feet, all in an instant. He dared not slap the animals into a bolting run, for the horses would certainly collide with Obmi and Keak, just a few paces to front of them. That will result in Gord's death, or at best his losing all hope of insinuating himself into the dwarf's company. Instead, the young thief used the trick he had seen Gellor perform not long ago. As he sprang to his feet, he placed a hand under the stirrups to either side, strengthening his legs and heaving upward with back and arms as he did so. It worked. One guard fell heavily to the left, the other half-orc sprawled to the right, while their horses, suddenly relieved of their burdens, whinnied in fear and reared armlessly. Gord darted quickly around to the right, where he had caught a glimpse of the guard there, face down. That sort of opportunity was not to be missed. The dazed half-breed was trying to gain his hands and knees, preparatory to getting to his feet, when sword and dagger struck in tandem. The villain coughed and fell back upon his face, arms and legs making feeble motions. Gord stopped again for good measure, and then spun to face the other man or that one had not been so stunned by the fall, and while Gord was busy with his mate, the half-cased humanoid had managed to pull his arbalest free from his bound saddle. As Gord turned, the fellow was bringing the weapon to his shoulder, looking to place Gord in his sight along the bolt. A series of leaps and bounds so confused the stupid half-orc that he threw the crossbow down in disgust and drew forth the heavy broadsword he wore scabbarded at his hip. Gord sprang in, pinked him on the cheek with his short sword, and quickly darted back out of range at the retaliatory slash the guard aimed at him. Come, come, my stupid eight-faced one, Gord taunted the guard. You'll have to do better than that to get me with that rusty lump of iron you are swinging. The half-orc wiped at his bleeding jaw, spat and waded in, the broadsword swinging in great shiting motions before him. Such a technique will work well enough against unskilled opponents, but employed against a swordsman such as Gord, with fencing skill and battle experience, it was almost loggable. Gord timed his attack so that he came in on the backswing of the heavy sword. A quick step, point straight, leg extended, arm shooting forth. The point of his blade pierced the half-orc's left arm, where the male gaped as the arm moved back. Gord parried the return shot of the broad-bladed